My name's John McLean. I'm the Director of Product Management for VMware. And what I really want to get through today is give you a picture of what VMware is doing to allow you to build self-service and automation within your enterprise on top of your private clouds that many of you are looking at building. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of context in terms of what we're doing with our overall management portfolio. And then I want to talk about some of the technologies that we have today, in particular the VMware Service Manager technology and what it can do and how it can be used to layer over the top of your private cloud today, and explain some of its capabilities that we're going to leverage for a dedicated portal and workflow request management layer that we're building that we internally call Project Sydney. So this is a technology that we have in development today. It's not GA. We're doing a tech preview here, both in these couple of sessions that I've been running as well as down on the demonstration pods. So that's really the most exciting part of this presentation, and I'll get to that later on. I really want to just give you some context and really explain what we can do today to help you build out request management. So you've probably seen lots of variations of this diagram through the week. Yes, we as VMware believe that the cloud era is very, very significant as the mainframe client server and even the web itself, and that it's going to transform the way that organizations both deliver and consume IT services, and that's going to drive the need for a whole new generation of management tools as we move from having lower level management tools that are interacting with the hardware to upper level where we have to deal with, in the long term, even multiple suppliers and move payloads around, and that's going to drive a whole lot of new needs. So there's a number of things. So the products that I want to talk about today really fall inside the management group, and I want to talk about just quickly some of the things that are driving the roadmaps for those products and are fundamental to what we're trying to achieve. So the first is operational efficiency, really trying to drive out manual tasks. Today, a lot of what organizations do in an operational sense continues to have a lot of scripted and manual interactions. I really believe we've got to get rid of all those interactions and build in automation at every level of the management stack. It's the only way we're going to provide the level of agility and efficiency and cost savings that organizations are going to need as they move into the cloud era. And the second is policy-driven service assurance. So we're of the belief that we need to continue to have controls and governance, need to have things like approvals and just configuration policies that are driving the way that payloads move around, what happens when there are issues, etc., so that we have governance and we just have consistency about how things are operating. And lastly, the cloud is about nothing if not freedom of choice. So we want to make sure that our management tools can operate in that heterogeneous environment, and our management tools are aware of the public service providers marketplace that's springing up to offer infrastructure as a service. And we can allow those workloads to be moved from the private cloud out to external service providers, and we can actually have some visibility into what's going on in those external service providers as well as internally. So that's what's really driving all of our roadmaps. And if you think about both self-service and workflow automation, they're really fundamental to achieving those outcomes. So self-service drives efficiency because you're pushing the burden of the data collection back onto the end consumer. You get that information early on, and it allows you to make decisions, automated decisions, based on that data. It's also the basis of freedom of choice. It abstracts the implementation of the service from the actual request. so that if you change that implementation over time, fundamentally change it, the self-service interface stays the same. And the workflow automation is really the fundamental piece that allows you to remove manual tasks, having some sort of orchestration layer that can sequence all of the steps that you need to perform, whether it's a provisioning task or something else. It also enforces the policies. So once you've established best practices, it ensures that they're followed consistently. So self-service and workflow, very, very important. So how do we layer this functionality over the top of the private clouds that we're trying to build out? So a lot of you today have deployed, you're on your virtualization journey, you have vSphere and vCenter managing some portion of your infrastructure, which has been growing over time. So that's where you are today. And I'm sure you've been to many sessions this week where you've learnt about vCloud Director. vCloud Director is the new foundation for the cloud. It enables a number of new constructs. It enables you to pool all of your infrastructure, compute, network, storage into an overall private cloud, and then logically partition all of that up into what we call organizations, completely isolated partitions within the cloud. It allows you to manage virtual data centers with different compute, storage, network capacities, and it allows you to publish catalogs of templates into each of those partitions. So that really gives you the foundation of the cloud. It also does one other very important thing, and that is it allows you to start to introduce more of a chargeback model, and it gives you a lot of flexibility around how you show the costs of using the infrastructure back to the business and ultimately actually do real charging in the longer term. So this is technology we've GA'd this week, and many service providers also are looking at this technology to build out their public cloud offerings. So this technology will get used both inside organizations for the private cloud and by service providers who are building out public cloud offerings. Now, VMware vCloud Director exposes the infrastructure through an API that we call the vCloud API. This is a REST-based API, which is important because it allows it to operate over the public internet, uses internet protocols. Secondly, we've made that API available because we want to drive interoperability. We want to allow you to have one management tool or one set of management tools that can see multiple private clouds and even see multiple service providers by communicating through these APIs. And that's what we've been working on and what I'll go through today. So conceptually, when we're trying to enable self-service and automation, really laying over the top of this some form of self-service portal, some form of catalog where you can make requests from, to fill in forms, to drive that through workflow processes, and to have asynchronous communication back to the end requester and perhaps to people who need to approve things through some sort of email templating engine. So these are some of the core capabilities that we think are important if you're trying to build a self-service and request management layer over the top of a private cloud. So as I indicated, I want to talk about some of the technology that we have available today that can enable you to build out this sort of layer. And then I'll move on to some of the exciting things we're working on internally. So VMware Service Manager. Service Manager is a complete IT service management offering that VMware has. When I talk about service management, I'm talking about things like service desk, asset management, change and release management, and request fulfillment. And I'll drill into those a little bit more, but give you a bit of a sense of what it is. Now, service management needs to have visibility across infrastructure, applications, and users. or desktops. And in each of these areas, we're seeing evolution from physical to virtual packaging and infrastructure and desktops. So there are integrations between service management and all of these other technologies. Now, when we're talking about service management, we're up at this business layer. So we're really exposing functionality through to business users. Business users may interact with Service Manager to do things like, at the extreme, log an incident, but also make requests. And it's really the request area that we'll focus on. So let me just drill down a little bit into the capabilities of this platform that are important and useful if you want to build out private cloud automation. So just one more drill through on the overall functionality that VMware Service Manager offers. Firstly, service desk functionality, so a self-service portal, the ability to log incidents, to track recurring incidents, which we call problems, to track service level agreements, how long does it take to resolve an incident, knowledge management. We offer configuration and change so that we can go out and discover the infrastructure, the applications, the desktops, and get a picture of how a business service is being delivered and what the dependencies are so that we can plan changes against it. And we can also enforce the actual change process in a structured way so that we're not changing production systems in the middle of peak usage. The third core use case that Service Manager tackles is asset management, and this is tracking everything from hardware inventory to software licenses and hardware parts, and tracking software licenses in particular through their life cycle, from the purchasing stage through the allocation to servers or desktops, and ultimately through to retirement. So that's what asset management is about. And the last one, which is the interesting one in terms of private cloud automation and request management and self-service, is service request fulfillment. Here, users go onto a self-service portal, they browse a catalog, they make requests, and that drives behind the scene a workflow. So I'm going to drill down just into that last one, because that's the one that's interesting for private cloud. So we have a look at some of the capabilities that we have in the technology today. First of all, the self-service portal and the service catalog. It has a hierarchical service catalog which end users can browse or search. They get a full shopping cart-like experience, so they can choose multiple items, add them to a shopping cart, and check out just like they're purchasing something from a retail site over the web. We can expose there the cost of those services, so we've got the ability to show back to the user how much their business unit's going to get charged when they make those requests. We've got access control in here so that different users will see different elements in the catalog based on their permissions. And we also have the ability to have pre-grouped logical bundles. So these are very abstract types of requests, things like a new employee request that behind the scenes might drive provisioning a new desktop, maybe even non-IT things like creating a new security access card, adding user permissions into a corporate directory. All sorts of activities might take place on the back of an abstract request like that. And of course, once users have made requests from the self-service portal, they can review the progress. Now, when they do make requests, you usually want to collect information from them. So the platform has capabilities to allow you to design the submission forms. It also allows you to use that same designer to design email templates. So when you want to send back notifications to the users to say that their request has been successful or approved or denied or whatever it is, you're able to design the content of those emails in exactly the same way and perform data substitution into them. And this is a graphical drag and drop screen designer that you use to build up these screens and email templates. It has all sorts of field types that it supports, all the basic ones, but also importantly, pickers that go back into the infrastructure to allow you to, for example, have a drop-down of the list of cost centers or the list of organizational units or people or particular elements of your virtualized infrastructure as pick lists within the forms. And you can organize those into tabs and collapsible sections. You can do things like hiding certain fields from certain users, and you also have field auditing. So a very, very powerful screen designer and email template designer that's part of the overall platform. So perhaps the most important piece of technology that's part of the VMware Service Manager platform is the workflow automation area. So there's a graphical workflow modeler. You can see a diagram of it here, a set of task types across the top. You drag and drop those to model your business processes that you want to enforce. So we have all of the classic types of workflow capabilities like serial and parallel routing, conditional branching based on attribute values and things like that, as well as manual tasks. Some of what you do may still include some manual tasks, and in particular, the approvals. And one of the really critical capabilities in the approval area is the ability to dynamically determine who you're going to send those approvals to. So rather than just sending an approval for infrastructure request through to Joe, the VP of operations, you're going to send it through to the requester's manager. You're going to look up the organizational hierarchy, or perhaps you're going to drive that based on the location that the user is based. There may be a different approver. So you're able to look through both organizational hierarchies as well as infrastructure hierarchies to determine who those approvals are going to go to. And then they may dynamically evaluate to multiple approvers, and you have to have multiple approvers before you're going to do something. So pretty sophisticated functionality in that approval area, which is really important. Of course, there's a set of automated tasks as well that are absolutely important, and that's what we're really trying to drive automation, so we want to do everything through these tasks that we can. So email notifications, driving those templates that we just talked about designing and sending them out to people. Again, dynamically calculating who you're sending those emails to. Doing things like manually updating software license inventories. I'll talk about how that gets used in the private cloud later on, so it's an interesting capability. Manipulating a service level clock. So if you do have something that has a set of manual tasks in it, perhaps you're building a custom virtual machine for someone and you're trying to implement that sort of process, you may have a service level to do that within a week, and you can encode that and you can stop and start that under workflow control. There may be certain areas of the operation that you don't want to measure, so you can manipulate that automatically. And perhaps most importantly, the integration tasks, being able to call out to other environments under workflow control and drive operations in them. You might want to drive provisioning actions in the cloud. You might want to drive permissioning actions into your corporate user directory, all sorts of actions that you might want to drive automatically under workflow control. So that connectivity is critically important as well. I talked about the service level management capability. So here we want to be able to measure how long certain processes are taking. And we want to be able to have different service levels for different types of requests. So we have a matrix set up to allow you to select based on attributes, might be priority, type of request, where the request is coming from, or who the requester is. That can drive a different type of service level. And where there are manual tasks, the people involved in those manual tasks will actually see a color-coded indicator as to whether they've got long for their time to expire. Now, we talked about the workflow and the ability to call out to different technologies. So that happens through an integration platform that's part of the VMware Service Manager platform. And we have a series of connectors that plug into that, both VMware connectors, EMC connectors, other third-party connectors, and you can custom build connectors that plug into that infrastructure. And once you've done that, you've got the ability from the workflow engine to very easily pass parameters backwards and forwards to that and make use of those connectors under control of your business process. Now, the connectors actually do three things. They firstly allow you to discover what's in the environment. You can't really perform operations on the environment until you know what's there. So they reach out into the environment and get a picture of what's there. They allow you to perform the actions. So this might be provisioning, for example. And they also receive events. And I'll explain what events are about on the next slide when we look in particular at the integration with vCloud Director itself. So let me step forward to that and talk about what we've done to integrate the Service Manager platform with vCloud Director, which GA'd this week. We've built a connector that fits into the integration platform that we just talked about that first of all does discovery. It reaches down into the cloud and brings back a picture of what entities exist in the cloud and how they interrelate. And you can see that graphically in this diagram. So you've got all your dependencies there. Now, if you're discovering also applications and desktops, they can be merged into this diagram so you have a complete picture of what's running. But what you see here is the cloud partition at the top, a virtual data center, a series of running vApps inside it, and the virtual machines underneath that. There's also the catalog. There may be multiple catalogs within a cloud partition, and you see those in that hierarchy as well. We've discovered those automatically from whether it's your private cloud or potentially even an external service provider. So now we've got a picture of what's inside the cloud. We're able to automate actions on it using all of those capabilities that we've just run through. So under workflow control, we can drive the instantiation of a new virtual application. We can deploy it. We can create new partitions within the cloud. Now, I said I'd come back to the event side, and I wanted to explain what the events are all about in context. The connectivity through to Cloud Director will automatically detect when a virtual application is deleted, whether that happens by the expiry of its deployment lease or alternatively, whether it's manually done from the console. So we'll know when that deletion happens, and that will raise an event up into this Service Manager platform, which we can respond to. And as we go through the rest of this presentation, we'll see how we might use that to manage software licenses. So this is all a great set of capabilities. You can use these capabilities in the VMware Service Manager platform today to go and build out a request automation self-service layer on top of VMware vCloud Director. So what I wanted to move on to now is what we internally call Project Sydney. So we believed that we needed something more than just that set of capabilities that I've gone through and all of the strength of the VMware Service Management platform. We believed that we needed to have something that was much more out of the box rather than being a platform that you can go and build this in. Really have something that you could install and use from day one to provide infrastructure self-service. We also believed that we needed to have a highly optimized user experience so that people making infrastructure requests didn't have to understand the broader complexity of all of IT. They could have something that was just for infrastructure self-service. That's what Project Sydney is all about. So when you think about this overall context of IT, Project Sydney is really down a level in a what we believe a very fast-growing area, but is really in the cloud management area. Eventually, we believe physical infrastructure will slowly disappear, and even traditional virtualized infrastructure will disappear and be consumed by the broader concept of the cloud. So Project Sydney is about providing that infrastructure as a service over the cloud, and that's it. It doesn't have that broader context. So what is it? It's an add-on to VMware vCloud Director. It sits over the top of VMware vCloud Director. It addresses three fundamental use cases. Firstly, it adds sophisticated workflow approval capabilities to vApp provisioning requests. So when you make a request, it'll drive it through an approval process rather than immediately actioning the provisioning. Secondly, it enables you to track software license usage within the cloud as VApps are provisioned. We allocate licenses, and as they're deleted, we free licenses up. And thirdly, it allows you to define some policies to make it very easy to create partitions within your cloud, and to enforce those enforce standards on those partitions. So we'll drill into each of these use cases. So I guess in short, Project Sydney is really all about allowing you to balance self-service with enforced policies and governance so that you can build out a private cloud with confidence and control. But let's drill into the use cases. So our first use case is someone like a QA engineer, or maybe a technical sales engineer, or a training user, someone who very, very regularly wants to provision VApps. So they go onto a self-service portal, they fill in a form, they choose the template that they're interested in instantiating, and they kick off a request. That will drive in a request approval workflow. It'll go to a manager, perhaps the line manager of the person making the request, perhaps to the cost center manager or someone like that. And this really gives you controlled approvals and governance over the process. And of course, this is asynchronous now because it's got to go through a manual approval, so eventually they'll get this email notification back. We drill down onto that. The second use case is really an extension of the first, and this is where we allow you to track the software license usage. So the specific workflow looks like what we have up here. As part of that workflow, based on the VApp template, we allocate software licenses, and when the VApp is ultimately deleted, we free those corresponding licenses up. And this enables you to just accurately keep track of the software license usage. And in fact, if you don't have sufficient licenses, it will stop the provisioning going ahead. The third use case is about cloud partitioning. And this is someone like a project manager or a QA manager. Maybe you're a project manager of a new project, Project Alpha. You come onto this self-service portal. You want to create a partition for your project team to use over the life cycle of the project. And you want to fill in some information. You want that to drive through an approval process, and ultimately have that come back and give you an email notification when that's actually happened. So let's move on and have a look at the user experience that we're actually building out. You might notice the branding on here. This is, as I mentioned, this is a project that we currently have in development. It's not GA technology. This is the user experience that we're driving towards, and we believe that the user experience is critically important to make this successful. So when you first log in, you'll actually see a list of the virtual applications that are currently running inside the particular cloud partition that you're currently looking at. Now, for those of you deeply familiar now with vCloud Director, this corresponds to the concept of an organization in vCloud Director. You're looking at the currently running VApps within an organization. Now, because we're targeting people outside of core IT, we're really putting this in the terminology of that end user, and we're just saying they're selecting a cloud. To them, it's a particular, their cloud that they're looking at, if you like, the project manager's cloud, the Project Alpha cloud, the QA cloud. So you have a drop-down list of the available cloud partitions up in the top right-hand corner. Very easy to switch between them if you have access to multiple of these partitions. You can filter that list of VApps to just show your own, to show everyone's within that cloud partition, and also to look at your outstanding requests. If you've made requests and they haven't been fulfilled yet because they're waiting on someone's approval, you can switch and get a view of those. Now, you can also hover over one of these VApps and get a current real-time status of where it is, and you can launch through to the lower level VCD, vCloud Director console if you want to from there. Just giving you a sense here of the dynamic nature of the UI. Again, we really felt the user experience was critically important to make this successful. Now, moving on to how you perform those operations, those key use cases from this user interface. So if I'm a QA engineer, most common thing I want to do is provision a new VApp. Big button in the top left-hand corner. Kick that off. Very simple dialogue to drive that. Choose a catalog. By default, when we create cloud partitions, they'll inherit a catalog from an IT master partition. So we here might select from the IT Gold Masters catalog a Windows 2008 server template, and we ask for an instance of that to be provisioned. We've got to give it a name, and the description will default from the template. Oops, let me go back there. We want to tell it how long we need the VApp until, and we can optionally choose a virtual data center if we've created multiple virtual data centers within that cloud partition. So that's it from a user perspective. Really want to keep the data entry as simple as possible. And that will actually asynchronously kick off the workflow request. There'll be an entry onto the My Request tab, and now that workflow is initiated in the background. And I'll just step through this in a little bit more detail. This is again leveraging all of the capabilities that we talked about before. So dynamic approval. Out of the box, the workflows that we ship will go to the line manager of the person who made the request, and we'll determine that from your user directory. So we'll integrate through with Active Directory, for example, and allow you to do that routing. Actually, the manager will get an email, so they can respond to that email from perhaps a mobile device and say, yes, I approve that, without actually going to a portal or any user interface to go and do that. They can just reply back to the email to do that approving. There's a couple of approve and deny links on the email templates that we ship out of the box. The next step we go on to is the software license allocation. So we associate the software licenses with a VApp template. So a VApp, remember, consists of multiple VMs. There might be an app server, be a WebLogic or something. There might be a database, an Oracle or a SQL server, and one of them is running Windows. So within this VApp, we've actually got 3 or 4 licenses we've got to allocate. So we associate those licenses with the VApp template, and as we provision, it will automatically consume those licenses for you. Here we actually call out to vCloud Director, and we call out indirectly through the integration platform that we looked at before, which is talking through the vCloud API. So this will actually drive the provisioning process, and it'll actually drive multiple sub-steps inside that, instantiating the instance, deploying it, powering it on. So it'll do all of those things. Then we send an email notification back to the end user, indicating that that's been successful. And of course, there are all the failure branches when the manager declines, when we're out of licenses, etc., etc. So that, from a user interface perspective, really covers use case 1 and 2. We've got the approvals happening as part of the provisioning request. We've got the software license allocation happening as part of that same request. The next thing that we expose out to the user interface is the ability to easily create cloud partitions. Now, looping back, this is someone like a project manager. Project manager is not going to know how to set up many of the attributes that are necessary to set up a cloud partition. They're not going to know how to set up virtual networks or what the default lease time should be on a VApp when it gets deployed. There's a lot of complexity that as a cloud operator at an administration level, you really want to ideally be able to enforce some of that complexity and make it much simpler for the end user. So that's what we've aimed to do in this area of the user interface. So we drill down into that. We're trying to create a new cloud partition. And again, remember that we've put this in the terminology of the user. To the project manager, they're creating their own cloud. So the first thing they need to do is they need to select where they want to stand up that cloud if there are multiple private clouds. You might just have one. You might have encapsulated everything into one big private cloud, in which case you'd have that. You may have an East Coast cloud, a West Coast cloud. You might be talking to an external service provider who's providing a public cloud for you as well. So you can choose where you want to stand up that partition. The second thing you do is you select from a set of predefined standardized policies. The administrator sets up these policies. These policies encapsulate network settings, things like maximum number of VMs and the default lease time on vApps as they get deployed. So the end user only has to choose from this policy. They no longer have to enter those 50 attributes that are necessary to stand up a cloud partition. The added benefit is at an administration level, we've now enforced standardization through these policies, so every partition looks similar to the next, making it much easier for the administrator to actually look after the overall private cloud. Of course, we need to give the cloud partition a name. So this is the Project Alpha partition. And we need to tell it what users or groups we want to have access to this cloud. This links through indirectly to your corporate user directory. So you choose the users that you want to have access to your cloud or your cloud partition. And that's it. Really wanted to drive simplicity here. You don't need to do anything else from a user perspective to create your own partition of the cloud. It will get based on that policy that has been defined. Now, of course, we've made it so easy, we don't want everyone coming in here and just going, I need a cloud, I need a cloud, I need a cloud, and end up with hundreds of cloud partitions. Right? So you want to drive probably this one even more than the individual provisioning through an approval process. So we use the same capabilities to drive that through a much simpler approval process here, because we are not dealing with software licenses in this case. So we just go through a manager approval. We call out to vCloud Director to actually drive the creation of the organization, the creation of the virtual data center, the assignment of all of the users. All of that complexity is actually hidden in that provision cloud step within the workflow. And then finally, we send an email notification back to the user. Pretty neat. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. So workflow automation and self-service, we believe are critical to really the three tenets of our overall management strategy, which is all about efficiency, control, and freedom of choice. Today, we have the VMware Service Management Platform, and that enables business service management really broadly across infrastructure applications and desktops. And you can certainly use that platform now that it's deeply integrated with vCloud Director to implement a self-service and workflow orchestration layer over the top of your private cloud. But we wanted to go a step further than that, and that's what Project Sydney is all about. Project Sydney is this internal project, not yet GA technology, but we are well advanced, so certainly keep your ears open and you will hear further announcements about it. And it will allow you to deploy this purpose-built portal for infrastructure as a service, provide these out-of-the-box approval processes, and it'll allow you to enforce policies on your cloud partitions so that you can deploy your private cloud with confidence and control. So with that, I'm going to finish up. You can go onto our website there and fill in this. I believe if you fill out the survey, there is a prize associated with that, so please give us your feedback. Thank you, everyone, and I'll be around for questions.